Okay, so now that you know some of the terrain and what it looks like, we can go over some terminology that can describe what all this crazy stuff is actually called. So what we're looking at right here is called a quarter pipe. And a quarter pipe or a ramp or a bowl or a pool, they all have very similar names to their pieces. So the green part right here, that's called the deck. And this yellow part is called coping. And a lot of times it's made out of cement because it's the coping of like a regular swimming pool. Or in a skate park, a lot of times coping is made out of metal. It's made out of some kind of steel. The red part here is called the transition. And this blue area is called the flat bottom. Now sometimes a transition can go a heck of a lot higher than this. This one's only about 4 feet high actually. So let's pretend that it goes like that, a lot higher. And the transition actually continues to curve until it's actually going vertical. Well, that part of the transition that we see highlighted here in purple is called vert, appropriately enough. And vert can be anything from a couple of inches to a couple of feet. Just like everything else in the skate park, you know, the design and the layout can vary a great deal. Now, where did all these names come from? Well, suppose you have something like this, a full pipe. Now, suppose that you built a platform on either side of the pipe. Then suppose you chop off the top half of the pipe. Well, there you go, you now have a half pipe that you can ride a skateboard in. Of course, you notice the transitions are butted up right against each other, which would make it pretty difficult to ride. So you stick flat bottom in between the transitions, and there you go. Now you have a shape that is more familiar to what you've seen on television and in skate parks and in people's backyards. That is a full half pipe. Now the typical measurement that you hear when people talk about all of these ramps and pools, they'll talk about something being, say, for example, 4 foot. Okay, well, let's take a closer look at that because there's actually 2 measurements that are involved. So like a 4-foot ramp would be from the deck to the flat bottom. That's typically what people are talking about when they talk about how big something is. But let's look at another example right here. Suppose we have 2 ramps that are both 4 feet high. But you notice the one on the left has a really fast, tight transition, and the one on the right has a much more gradual transition. The one on the left has a transition which is 8 feet in diameter. The one on the right has a transition which is 16 feet in diameter. So the one on the left would be a 4-foot ramp or pool with an 8-foot diameter transition. The one on the right is a 4-foot ramp or pool with a 16-foot diameter transition. Of course, we never call it by its diameter. It's always called by the radius. So on the left, it's actually a 4-foot with a 4-foot radius, and on the right, it's a 4-foot with an 8-foot radius. Now let's look at a real-world example of that. As we come down and kind of see the cross-section right here in this pool, you can see this transition is really, really tight. If we superimpose a circle over that transition, you can see how tight and fast the curve of it is. It's only 4 feet high, but it almost has vert on it. By contrast, here's one that's 4 feet high and is a much more gradual transition. You can see by the curve of the circle that it's not as close to vertical. Something like this would be a heck of a lot easier to ride. It's a lot smoother, a lot easier to learn on as a beginner. Now this part that you see sticking out right here is called a hip. And again, hips come in many different shapes and sizes, but hips are basically parts that kind of bow out from a transition. Now we already know what the quarter pipe is right there, but this part, highlighted in blue, is called a roll-in. And a roll-in is basically a transition that goes from the deck to the transition without any coping, so you can roll in nice and smooth. This piece right here is called a spine, and it's when you have 2 transitions and coping that is basically butted up against one another without any deck in between. This is an amoeba bowl. Now, bowls come in many different sizes and shapes, and they're often given nicknames based upon their appearance. For example, a kidney bowl is kind of shaped like a kidney. There's keyhole bowls, which kind of are shaped like keyholes. This one, if you were to look straight down upon it, kind of has this amoeba sort of shape, hence the name an amoeba bowl. It's a really tiny little bowl. It's only about 4 feet high with 4-foot transitions. And as you can see right here, it's sort of squared off. So you have straight sections and you have curved sections. The curved sections, which you can see highlighted in blue, are called the corners. The straight sections, which you see highlighted in red, are called face walls. Now, corners and face walls are not always in pools. As you can see right here, there's this little mini half pipe, and the mini half pipe actually has a face wall in the back, and it actually has 2 corners attached to it as well. Now when we pan over a little bit, we can see highlighted in blue, this is called a pyramid. I think it's pretty obvious where that name comes from. We pan over a little bit more, we can see this sort of long embankment that's a sort of a quarter pipe embankment. This type of embankment is called a flat bank. As you can see right here, this bank, highlighted in blue, has a lot of different sort of parts to it. There's a flat bank closer to the foreground, and a sort of quarter pipe more in the background. Now, as I mentioned earlier, coping can be made out of metal, or it could be like this, which is a skate park that's using standard pool coping. Now this image shows you a number of different things. It's a quarter pipe with a channel in between right here, and this part that you see highlighted in red is called an extension, and that extension is obviously going up to vert. Let's speed through this footage a little bit, and let's zoom down here. We'll take a look at another extension a little bit further down. We can see highlighted in red, this extension is a lot smaller, but still uses the exact same terminology. It's still called an extension, even though this one doesn't go up to vertical. Now here we see a more traditional style of pool. We can zoom in and let's name all the parts that we see right here. I think they're all pretty obvious. The red part is called the deck. The yellow part is still called the coping. The green part is the transition. And we can see on the vert we have some blue tiles, which are just called tiles. Now here's an interesting piece. This is called a clamshell. Sometimes it's also called an orange peel. And this actually has what's called oververt. You can see this part highlighted in red is actually going beyond vertical and curving back in upon itself. We look down this way. This section here is called a snake run. As you can see, we have transitions on both the left-hand side and the right-hand side. And this person is coming down this little hip and carving around that whole section there is called a snake run. Now this piece right here, we can see 2 examples of oververt. In the background is the first piece of oververt that we looked at. Then this one right here in the foreground, you can see this arrow sort of shows where the vertical part is at. And then, if you look, you can see it actually goes beyond that. It continues to curve beyond vertical, back in on itself, and that is an example of oververt. This piece of oververt also has some nice cement pool coping on it. And as we pan over to the right here, we can see that this section of oververt is actually a part of a cloverleaf bowl. There's a small section of the cloverleaf. It's about 6 feet deep with 6-foot transitions, or excuse me, I think that has 7-foot transitions. And then right here, this part is 9 feet, and that has about 2 feet of vert on it. This is a totally different skate park. This is sort of a little mini half. It's got a horseshoe shape to it. And let's speed up and look at the street section. Here we can see a lot of stairs and a lot of rails in the street section. I won't even bother to label those because it's pretty obvious what stairs and rails are. And here we have another pool. This one is way bigger than the other ones that we've looked at. It's got nice pool coping on it. It has some tiles, it has some vert, it has a shallow end. It's about 6 feet deep. And then this guy is coming down this piece right here. It's called a waterfall, and he's flying up into the deep end, which is about 10 feet deep. And then we can zoom up ahead to this last section here. This is another example of a snake run. This one is a more traditional snake run. The first one we looked at isn't a typical sort of snake run, but you can see this kid comes carving around and he hits this bowl at the end and launches right on out. The bowl at the end is about 6 feet deep, and I think that's about it. I think we're done. So now you have a good understanding of a lot of the terminology that is used to describe the terrain of skate parks.